And, just actually following up on that, Anna illustrated the stakes of all of the implications of these issues that we're talking about. And the question of police murder and violence and the systemic issues that they're attached to, people have been risking their physical well-being for weeks to protest across this country. And protesters, few lives have been lost. There's been serious injury. This is a serious act of politics that points to life and death issues, and with a certain kind of analysis gets to the heart of all of the inequities and brutalities that define how we do capitalism and how we design this country's economy, as well as, of course, all of the legacies of racism and brutality connected to law enforcement. And so this is why I want to say it's very, very important now that what we have seen does not get channeled into a wave of HR politics and metaphysics, basically about sort of reducing all of this to people's individual attitudes, behaviors, or beliefs. We're talking about systems issues. We're talking about the completion of the infinitely far from complete 1960s rights revolution of actually codifying full and actual civil and legal rights for all, something that has been being reversed and had been fought back against by the right ever since it had even been implemented legally in the 60s. Just in 2013, we saw the Roberts Court, as an example, gut the Voting Rights Act. And now look at how hard it is, as an example, to vote in Georgia. So we need to, in a substantive way, complete that mission. And we also need to connect it to, just as A. Philip Randolph did, and this is another really important Jacobin series you can watch, to a broader and fully integrated, in terms of economics and social struggle for full equity in this country, in a way that will necessarily have huge implications for policing, because police have been deployed to manage and terrorize and control all of the sections of the population, primarily, of course, poor, working, and people of color, who we have decided through policy mechanisms to deliver nothing for, to allow to live in ongoing, deindustrialized, vicious racism, poverty, and brutality, with diminished job prospects, housing, and healthcare. Police are deployed consciously, and it is inseparable from gentrification, from all of the other issues that we talk about, to understand police violence in that context. And I want to just put up first, this is a tweet from Lester Spence, who's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. This is the moment when the energy from the protest shifts to diversity workshops, implicit biases, hires, new academic units, and all this other stuff shouldn't occur at the expense of the main thing. Let the main thing be the main thing. And I like that framing. Of course, and there is no question that implicit bias is real, that diversifying workforces is important, that the legal fight that has been gutted and undermined by numerous Republican administrations to fight against job discrimination using the strength of the federal government is absolutely essential. But the broader range here of what is implicated by these protests and the uprising against police terror goes to the core of how we actually distribute resources and do power in this society. I want to play a clip from Cedric Johnson, who is an excellent scholar you can read on Jacobin as an example. This is from a talk he gave about a year ago on what it would take to end the policing crisis.
Right, this doesn't just go back to slavery, right? There's a tendency for some academics to focus on, like, the paddy rollers, these guys who were sent around to capture runaway slaves and bring them back to the owners. because they wore badges that very much resemble the kind that police officers wear today. I think our problems are much later breaking. And I want to argue that they're deeply connected to the type of society we have. And we're implicated in it, right? I don't want you to think it's just something, oh, these screwed up police over here. We benefit in some ways from that style of policing. Much of the lifestyle that we enjoy, the class position that a lot of us enjoy, is based on this policing that's happening in other places. So I want to think about this in two ways. The kind of policing we have begins in the post-war era, so right after World War II. And I'm going to use Los Angeles as an example because there's a lot of important things that happen here in this city. It becomes sort of the testing ground for what policing would become. And then I want to fast forward after that to the period during the 1980s when it really intensifies. And that's when those numbers really begin to flip over, where the majority of people are black and brown in a lot of prisons in certain states. Some people focus on the war on terror, but there's something else that we need to focus on, which is the taking back of the city, right? What's often referred to as revanchism, revenge. The investor class, suburbanites who now decide they want to move back, get a loft somewhere in the city. In order for that to happen, aggressive policing was part of the strategy to clear the ground of homeless people, clear the ground of the poor, move out the drug dealers, at least the ones who was black and brown, and create the kind of space that would allow for real estate speculation and development.
Okay, so, and I think, again, there's disputes about how much of, what line of history we want to talk about here. And of course, there's scholars who've demonstrated the connection between the foundations of policing in literally in enforcing slavery and the departments that have been deployed today. But there's a really important value, though, in also breaking it into its constituent parts and seeing that the modern phase of policing that we're talking about and dealing with is inseparable from the capitalist structure of city design today. And ultimately, again, and as we watch as this could go in two different directions, of a fundamental assault on class structure and white supremacy for serious policy outcomes and serious shifting of resources, or into a conversation which is in times very important but necessarily limited about people's personal biases and beliefs inside specific structures. And I'm going to just cite Cedric Johnson one more time here. He has a great piece in Non-Site that I'd recommend everybody read called The Wages of Roediger, Why 3 Decades of Whiteness Studies Have Not Produced the Left We Need. And I'm going to just also conclude with one quote from this. Beginning with the New Deal establishment of the Federal Housing Administration and expansion of an expansion after World War II under Harry Truman, the U.S. embarked on a housing revolution, a process of mortgage lending, massive highways and infrastructure development, and new home construction that transformed millions into nominal property holders and members of the new middle class. Suburban development and all manner of consumer activity propagated a consumer class identity, sweeping away old urban, ethnic, and proletarian affinities and cementing the loyalty of more secure workers to the Cold War growth trajectory of defense spending, urban renewal, and suburbanization. Woven into the same process were policies that resegregated the Black urban poor through tower block housing, freeway construction, and practices like redlining, which combined to devalue and deter investment in central city neighborhoods. Then, of course, in the clip, he talked about the reclaiming of the city for those same classes that had sort of been bought off through suburbanization, and that why that process of doing that is completely inseparable from understanding things that arose like broken windows policing. And the point of the broader argument here is that instead of sitting in middle class spaces, to use the parlance, and talking about individual beliefs and tendencies, we need to get to the overall engine that has actually driven these policies and cost so much well-being and so many lives. This needs to go in a material, not culturalist direction.
I think you're absolutely right. And I really appreciate how Cedric Johnson is emphasizing this. I haven't listened to your interview with him yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Because I think a common mistake I'm seeing among people who maybe aren't as immersed in this stuff as we are is with the police and its treatment toward the homeless. You know, the lack of resources toward affordable housing. That's not the bug, it's the feature, right? And I see a lot of people who are now very engaged in what's happening. They're going to the protests. They're fired up about police brutality, but they're also pretty comfortable buying the downtown LA loft, which then, you know, leads to the gentrification and then leads to the type of policing that we're talking about right now, the type of broken windows policing, pushing homeless people out. And we're seeing it all throughout, you know, the area that I live in, Los Angeles.
And as Adolph Reed always says, I'm sorry to but it's just exactly what you're saying, Anna, because it's like there's white identity, racist capitalism as personified by basically the Republican Party, and then this neoliberal democratic model, which still says you can have a completely unequal, vicious society that actually will still trap most people of color because of the disproportionate effects of distribution and class. But as long as you have proportional representation in the upper strata, then you've solved the problem, and you haven't addressed the brutalities that, again, can just only be addressed by fundamental public good provisions, housing, healthcare, and all of those other public works, whatever. And it needs to go in that direction. And it's so concerning to me to see, you know, a very, very, very important impulse and conversation that needs to happen. Getting, you know, I could see it's gonna turn into like upper middle class, like, you know, reading groups and like a new, like, you know, self-improvement project, and not an interrogation about where resources actually are and how things are actually working. I acknowledge my privilege, but can I keep my money is not going to get us where we need to go.
Yeah, you make an excellent point. You know, Inglewood, I think, is a really great example. So for all the Angelenos engaging in these protests, you know, I commend you for it. Awesome. But, you know, it's interesting to see some of these people, you know, speak out against what's going on. And at the same time, they were the most vocal about, you know, real estate speculation, like engaging in the real estate speculation in Inglewood because they're building this new stadium. And so that has created a very unstable situation for people who've been living in Inglewood, California for decades. And I think this is such an important thing to focus on. And I want people who identify with the left to just really pay close attention to this, because unless we change these systemic issues, we're going to run into the same problems over and over again. I'm really tired of the performative politics and the performative actions.
All of a sudden, a conversation about the core drivers of our society, it's, you know, it's another wave of sort of, you know, HR trainings and Twitter garbage. We need to do better. Or one of my heroes, Cabral, claim no easy victories. I want to plug this book.